The screech didn't come from the audience. It tore from the massive speakers flanking the stage. 1 second, Preston Holt was standing in the spotlight, looking like a golden god in his Italian suit, promising the world to our investors. The next second, the giant digital map of the world turned the color of fresh blood. A deafening, distorted electronic noise shattered champagne glasses in the front row. System critical, the screen flashed. Then the numbers dropped. The live inventory metrics, the heartbeat of Valkyr Logistics, didn't just dip, they flatlined to zero. I sat at the VIP table pushed right up against the stage lip, freezing in my seat. Preston, our arrogant 32-year-old CEO, stopped mid-sentence. His confident smile dissolved into a mask of pure terror. He clawed at his tie, gasping for air like a fish thrown onto concrete. His eyes rolled back, and he tipped forward, crashing off the podium and slamming onto the carpet with a sickening bone-heavy thud, landing inches from my polished shoes. Pandemonium erupted. Security guards shouted. Investors screamed. But in the eye of the storm, Preston's trembling hand shot out and gripped my ankle with a strength born of desperation. I leaned down, the smell of his expensive cologne mixed with the sweat of fear. He pulled himself up, his face pale and clammy, and looked directly into my soul. "Rowan," he wheezed, his voice barely audible over the sirens wailing in the distance. "They found the second ledger." Then his grip went slack, and his head hit the floor. As the paramedics swarmed him, I didn't move. I just stared at the red screen blinking above us, realizing the nightmare I had predicted 6 months ago had finally arrived. The chaos of the ballroom vanished, replaced instantly by the suffocating silence of the boardroom. It was 6 months earlier, the day my life fell apart. My name is Rowan. I am 44 years old, and for the last 18 years, I served as the operations director at Valkyr Logistics. I didn't just work there, I built the place. I took them from a messy warehouse using spreadsheets to an automated empire. But on that Tuesday morning, none of that mattered. I had walked into that meeting with a coffee in my hand and a smile on my face, ready to discuss the Q3 safety budget. But the atmosphere in the room was cold enough to crack glass. Preston sat at the head of the long table, flanked by the HR director. There were no pleasantries, no small talk. Preston didn't even look up from his phone as I entered. "Sit down, Rowan," he said, his voice flat and bored. I sat. Preston finally looked up, his eyes devoid of any respect for the 18 years I had poured into building this company from a garage startup to a logistics empire. He slid a single, thin folder across the table. It stopped right at the edge, hanging there precariously, just like my career. "We've run the numbers," Preston said, tapping his fingers on the table. "And frankly, the math doesn't work anymore. Your department is bleeding money on redundant checks and old-school compliance." "Compliance isn't redundancy, Preston. It's the law," I countered, feeling a hot flush of anger rising up my neck. He smirked, a cruel twisting of his lips. "In the modern world, speed is the law. You're slowing us down. You have become what the board calls a fiscal drag. You're heavy, you're expensive, and we don't need you anymore." The term hit me like a physical slap. Fiscal drag. I wasn't a person to him. I was just a line item in red ink. I looked at the director, but she refused to meet my gaze. I realized then that the decision wasn't up for debate. It had been made weeks ago. Before I could defend myself or explain the complexity of what I did, the heavy oak doors swung open. 3 young men walked in, bringing a burst of loud energy into the funeral-like atmosphere. They looked like they had just rolled out of a dorm room, hoodies, sneakers, and smug grins plastered on their faces. "Rowan, meet the future," Preston announced, leaning back in his leather chair with satisfied arrogance. "This is the new efficiency team. They're digital natives. They don't just use the system, they disrupt it." One of the kids, a guy with messy hair and a tablet tucked under his arm, picked up one of my leather-bound logbooks from the table. He flipped through the handwritten pages and actually laughed out loud. "Paper logs," he scoffed, looking at his friends. "What is this 1990? We're migrating this entire workflow to the cloud. AI-driven, serverless, zero latency. No more on-prem dinosaurs." I stood up, my chair scraping loudly against the floor. "It's not about the cloud," I said, my voice shaking with suppressed rage. "The Aurora Protocol, the system that runs our entire global shipping network, isn't a toy. It requires a certified human sign-off every 6 months. It's a federal requirement to prevent fraud and inventory drift." Preston waved his hand dismissively, as if swatting away a fly. That's just boomer paranoia, Rowan. It's a new era. AI can handle the audits faster and better than you ever could. We're cutting the anchor so the ship can finally fly. They looked at me with pity. They saw a dinosaur. I looked at them and saw children playing with a loaded gun. The system wasn't built to fly, Preston, I warned, staring him dead in the eye. It was built not to crash. The meeting ended abruptly. I was given 1 hour to clear out 18 years of my life. I walked back to my office, feeling like a ghost haunting my own hallways. I sat at my desk, the same desk where I had slept countless nights during the startup phase, and read the separation agreement. It was insulting. 2 months of pay in exchange for my silence. There was a strict non-disclosure agreement regarding future system performance. I took my pen, a heavy brass fountain pen I had bought when we landed our first $1 million contract, and drew a thick black line through the NDA clause. I initialed it aggressively. The HR director, hovering in the doorway to make sure I didn't steal a stapler, looked annoyed but didn't dare speak. I began to pack. I didn't take the awards or the plaques. I took the picture of my late wife, Clara, and placed it gently in a cardboard box. Then, I opened the floor safe behind my desk. Inside were 3 black, leather-bound notebooks. These weren't company property. They were my personal intellectual property, protected by a specific founder's rider in my original 2004 contract. They contained the source code logic, the architectural skeleton of the Aurora Protocol. Leave those, Preston barked from the hallway. He had followed me, watching my every move. Read my contract, Section 12. I replied, not breaking my rhythm. Intellectual property created prior to 2018 belongs to the creator. These go with me. I shoved them into my bag and zipped it shut. I picked up my box and walked to the door, stopping inches from Preston's face. The air between us crackled with tension. Preston, I said, my voice low and dangerous. Do not turn off the safety valve. You have no idea what it holds back. He rolled his eyes and checked his watch. Goodbye, Rowan. Enjoy being obsolete. The silence of my house the next morning was deafening. For 2 decades, my internal clock had been set to the rhythm of the logistics floor. The beep of scanners, the roar of trucks, the constant ringing of phones. Now there was only the hum of the refrigerator and the chirping of birds outside. I felt hollowed out, betrayed. I sat at my kitchen table with a cup of cold coffee, staring at the wall. I felt like a captain who had been thrown off his own ship in the middle of the ocean. I opened my laptop, intending to update my resume, but my fingers moved on their own accord. I navigated to my personal archives and pulled up a saved PDF file. The system charter I had written 5 years ago. This was the Bible of the Aurora Protocol, the rules that govern the machine. I scrolled past the operational codes, past the routing algorithms, until I found it. The text I was looking for was buried deep in the compliance section. Section 804, Automated Regulatory Reporting. I read the words I had written years ago. To ensure compliance with Federal Trade Commission regulations, the system requires a certified human encryption key every 180 days. If the key is not detected, the system will assume the database has been compromised and will initiate a lockdown to preserve evidence. I checked the server time synchronization protocols. To ensure global consistency across time zones, the Aurora Protocol operated on Coordinated Universal Time, UTC. The audit cycle was hard-coded to reset every 180 days at exactly midnight UTC. I did the mental conversion. By a stroke of fate, the next 180-day cycle ended at midnight UTC on a Saturday. In our local time zone, that landed exactly at 8 p.m. on Friday night. Preston had 178 days left before the world fell apart, and he didn't even know it. The weeks following my termination were a slow, humiliating burn. I had expected headhunters to be banging down my door. I was the architect of the Aurora Protocol, the most advanced logistics system in the state. But my phone didn't ring. My emails went unanswered. It wasn't until I ran into an old colleague at the grocery store that I learned why. He couldn't even look me in the eye. Preston is talking, Rowan, he whispered, glancing around like he was afraid of being seen with me. He's telling everyone you were let go for gross incompetence. He's saying the system was a mess, and he had to fire you to fix it. You're radioactive. I went home and stared at my reflection in the mirror. Fiscal Drag. The label was following me. My savings were bleeding out. I had to swallow my pride. I eventually found work, but it wasn't at a Fortune 500 company. It was a small, grimy shipping outfit called Packet-Right, operating out of a converted garage in the industrial district. The owner, a gruff man named Sal, didn't care about rumors. He just wanted his trucks to run on time. "I can't pay you what you're used to," Sal grunted, chewing on a toothpick. "I don't need the money, Sal." I lied, though I desperately did. "I just need to work." So while Preston was sitting in my old leather chair overlooking the city skyline, I was sitting on a plastic crate in a drafty garage, optimizing delivery routes on a scratched-up laptop. It was humbling. It was gritty. But it kept my mind sharp, and it gave me a front-row seat to watch the disaster that was slowly brewing across town. 3 months passed. The winter thaw turned into spring slush. I had settled into a rhythm at the garage, finding a strange peace in the simplicity of the work. But I kept one eye on the calendar. The 180-day countdown on the Aurora Protocol was halfway done. Late one Tuesday night, my phone buzzed on the nightstand. I rolled over, squinting at the screen. It was a text from a number I didn't have saved, but I knew the sender immediately. It was Tarek, a junior analyst at Valkyr. The only one on my old team who actually cared about the work, not just the paycheck. The text was short, but it made my blood run cold. "Rowan, the inventory numbers aren't matching the warehouse. The system keeps throwing error code 77. Preston told us to manually override the flags." I sat up, sleep vanishing instantly. Error code 77 meant physical drift. It meant that items the computer said were in the warehouse simply weren't there. It was the first symptom of a system that was losing its mind. My thumbs flew across the screen. "Do not touch the code, Tarek. If you override the safety flags, you blind the system. It won't know what's real anymore." 3 dots danced on the screen for what felt like an eternity. Finally, his reply came through. He doesn't care. He says the warnings are just glitches scaring the investors. He wants all green lights for the merger. I lowered the phone, my heart hammering against my ribs. Preston wasn't just ignoring the safety valve. He was trying to weld it shut. I wasn't in the boardroom when the decision was made, but based on what I learned later, I can picture it perfectly. Preston was staring at the dashboard in my old office. The Aurora Protocol was doing exactly what I designed it to do. It was screaming for help. Red warning banners were flashing across the monitors, signaling that thousands of units of stock were unaccounted for. This wasn't a glitch, it was a reality check. But Preston didn't see a safety feature. He saw a problem. The massive merger with Sterling Holdings was approaching, and error screens don't sell for $2 billion. Desperate and unwilling to admit he didn't understand the system, Preston bypassed the internal IT team entirely. He hired an expensive external fixer, a freelance coder who didn't ask questions. He gave the coder a simple, catastrophic instruction. Make the screens turn green. The coder didn't fix the inventory drift. He didn't audit the warehouse. He simply wrote a patch script that intercepted the error messages and deleted them before they hit the dashboard. It was like putting a piece of black tape over the check engine light of a car speeding down the highway. The system stopped complaining. The red banners vanished. The dashboard showed 100% efficiency. Preston leaned back in his chair, smiling, thinking he had solved the Rowan problem. He had no idea he had just blinded the company's only eye. The bypass worked, too well. With the warnings silenced, the disconnect between reality and the digital records grew wider every day. Trucks were arriving to pick up pallets that didn't exist. Customers were ordering items that were already gone. To anyone paying attention, the company was imploding. But Preston wasn't paying attention to the warehouse floor. He was looking at the stock price. To bridge the gap, Preston did something that crossed the line from incompetence to criminal. He opened a spreadsheet on his private drive. He began inputting fake inventory numbers, phantom pallets, ghost shipments, products that existed only in his imagination. He fed these numbers into the system via a manual administrative override to balance the books. He called it projected stock. The law calls it fraud. This was the birth of the second ledger. It was a simple Excel file, password protected, living on his secure personal server. In this ledger, everything was perfect. Profits were up. Stock was plentiful. Efficiency was through the roof. It was the lie he needed to sell the company. Preston thought he was a genius. He thought he was playing 4D chess while the rest of us were playing checkers. But he forgot one crucial thing. The Aurora Protocol wasn't just a calculator. It was a trap. And by feeding it lies, He was just adding weight to the crushing blow that was waiting for him at the 180-day mark. A week later, Tarek asked to meet me. We chose a greasy diner on the edge of town, far away from the polished glass towers of the financial district. When Tarek walked in, he looked 10 years older than the last time I saw him. He was pale, jumping at the sound of the door closing. He slid into the booth opposite me, keeping his hood up. "He's cooking the books, Rowan," Tarek whispered, pushing a lukewarm coffee around with his spoon. "I saw the raw data. The warehouse is empty, but the system says it's full. He thinks the system is just broken, so he's filling the gaps with fake numbers to keep the merger deal alive." I felt a heavy stone settle in my gut. Does anyone else know? Just the new efficiency team, but they're too scared to say anything. They think this is how business works. Tarek reached into his pocket and slid a small, silver USB drive across the table. I downloaded the logs, the real logs, and the manual overrides Preston authorized. I put my hand over the drive, but didn't pick it up yet. "Tarek, listen to me carefully. If I look at this now, I become an accomplice. If you hold on to this, you're a whistleblower." "I don't want to go to jail, Rowan," he said, his voice cracking. "You won't," I assured him, sliding the drive into my pocket. "Keep your head down. Do exactly what he says. But save every email. The audit timer is still ticking. When that clock hits 0, this drive is the only life raft you'll have." The news broke on a rainy Tuesday morning, splashing across every business channel and news feed in the country. Mega merger confirmed. Sterling Holdings to acquire Valkyr Logistics for $2 billion. I sat in my cramped office at the garage, watching the announcement on a small, dusty television. Preston was on screen, standing next to Harlan Sterling, the 60-year-old CEO of the acquiring conglomerate. Preston looked triumphant, shaking hands and smiling for the flashing cameras. He spoke about synergy and next-generation automation, taking credit for the very infrastructure I had spent nearly 2 decades building. "Valkyr represents the future of supply chain management," Preston declared, his voice smooth as silk. "Our proprietary Aurora system has increased efficiency by 40% in just the last quarter." I took a sip of my coffee, tasting bile. That 40% efficiency increase was a fiction, a mirage built on silenced error codes and ghost inventory. The valuation wasn't real. It was a bubble filled with toxic gas, waiting for a single pinprick to explode. My boss, Sal, walked in, wiping grease from his hands with a rag. He looked at the TV, then at me. "Isn't that the clown who fired you?" "That's him," I said quietly. $2 billion, Sal whistled. "You must be kicking yourself for leaving." "I didn't leave, Sal. I was evicted," I replied, my eyes fixed on Preston's smiling face. "And that $2 billion? It's going to evaporate faster than rain on a hot sidewalk. Just wait." The phone call came 2 days later. I didn't recognize the number, but when I answered, the voice was unmistakable. "Rowan, how have you been, buddy?" It was Preston. His tone was jarringly cheerful, dripping with a fake camaraderie that made my skin crawl. He sounded like an old friend calling to catch up, not the man who had called me a fiscal drag and thrown me out of the building. "What do you want, Preston?" I asked, cutting straight through the noise. He chuckled nervously. "Right to business, as always. Look, we're doing the final due diligence for the Sterling merger. The auditors need access to the legacy archive, the stuff from before 2018. It seems locked behind some old encryption." I knew exactly what he was talking about. The deep archive. It wasn't encrypted, it just required the correct navigational syntax, something I had documented in the notebooks he let me take. "I can't help you, Preston. I don't work there anymore." "Come on, Rowan. Don't be like that." His voice hardened slightly. "We just need you to come in for a few hours. Unlock the files, walk the auditors through the old logs. I can authorize a consulting fee. Say, $200 an hour. $200. It was an insult. He was asking me to help him sell the company he stole from me for pennies. "I'm afraid I'm busy with my new clients," I said calmly. "Good luck with the merger." "Rowan, wait." I hung up. If the phone call was the carrot, the letter that arrived the next day was the stick. A courier delivered a thick envelope to Sal's garage. It was a formal cease and desist order from Valkyr's legal department. The letter was aggressive, threatening, and completely baseless. It claimed that I had stolen intellectual property, specifically referencing the 3 leather-bound notebooks I had taken, and demanded their immediate return, along with a threat of a lawsuit for sabotage of corporate assets. It was a classic bully tactic. Preston was trying to scare me into submission. He thought that a guy working out of a garage wouldn't have the resources to fight back. He was wrong. I didn't panic. I didn't call him back screaming. Instead, I dipped into my dwindling savings and hired a contract lawyer. We drafted a single-page response. We attached a copy of my original employment contract from 2004, highlighting Clause 12, Creator Ownership Rights, which explicitly stated that any handwritten notes and personal logs remained the sole property of the employee. We sent it back via certified mail. The message was clear: I am not afraid of you. And I kept the receipts. Preston went silent. He realized he couldn't bully me, and he couldn't buy me. He was on his own. Back at Valkyr headquarters, the invisible clock was ticking louder every day. It was day 150 since my termination. The Aurora Protocol, faithful to its programming, woke up deep in the server stack. It sent an automated, high-priority email to the registered system administrator account, which was now directed to Preston's inbox. Subject: Urgent Compliance Alert Body. Certified human encryption key required in 30 days. Failure to verify system integrity will result in the execution of Protocol 804. Preston was sitting in his office, swamped with merger paperwork and catering menus for the upcoming gala. He saw the notification pop up on his screen. He frowned, opening it. He saw the words encryption key and Protocol 804 and scoffed. Another glitch, he muttered to himself. He remembered me talking about safety valves and assumed this was just a maintenance reboot protocol. He figured he couldn't afford a system reboot right before the merger, so he decided to suppress it. He hovered his mouse over the delete button. He didn't call IT. He didn't call legal. He simply clicked delete, sending the warning into the trash folder. Problem solved, he thought. He had just ignored the fire alarm while pouring gasoline on the floor. A week later, the anxiety finally started to gnaw at Preston. The Protocol 804 warning had popped up again, persistent and unyielding. He couldn't risk the system going into a maintenance cycle or lockdown before the gala, so he finally decided to act. But he didn't call me. That would be admitting defeat. Instead, he hired a boutique cybersecurity firm, expensive white hat hackers who specialized in corporate rescue. Their team spent 3 days trying to crack the Aurora kernel. They tried to bypass the timer. They tried to fake my digital signature. They tried to delete the compliance module entirely. On the third day, the lead hacker walked into Preston's office, looking exhausted and defeated. "We can't do it," the hacker admitted. "The code isn't just a layer on top. It's baked into the foundation. It's hard-coded logic. If we try to rip it out, the entire database corrupts. It's a structural load-bearing wall." Preston slammed his fist on the desk. "So what am I paying you for? Fix it." "We can't," the hacker shrugged. "Whatever Deadman Switch this is, it requires the original key. Or you wait for the timer to run out and see what happens." Preston fired them on the spot. He decided to gamble. He convinced himself that the system was bluffing. He would just fake the final reports for the merger manually. He told himself the system wouldn't actually do anything drastic. It was just a computer, after all. He was the CEO. He was in charge. He was wrong. 2 days before the gala, a courier arrived at the garage, not with a lawsuit, but with an invitation. It was heavy, cream-colored cardstock embossed with gold foil. "You are cordially invited to the Valkyr Future Gala." It wasn't from Preston. It was signed by Harlan Sterling, the CEO of the acquiring conglomerate. A handwritten note was clipped to the front. "Rowan, my due diligence team noted your signature is on every compliance document for 18 years, then vanishes 6 months ago. I'd be honored to meet the architect before we finalize the acquisition." It was a power move, intentional or not. Harlan was old school. He respected the builders, not just the sellers. He had no idea I had been fired in disgrace. He likely assumed I was just a retired consultant. I stared at the invitation. Going back, there would be walking into the lion's den. It would mean seeing Preston in his moment of triumph. It would mean standing in the room where I had been erased. But then I looked at the date. The gala was scheduled for Friday night. I did the math in my head. Friday night at 8 p.m. marked exactly midnight UTC. It was exactly 180 days since my last certified audit. The gala wasn't just a party. It was ground zero. I picked up my phone and texted Tarek. "I'm coming." I wasn't going to crash the party. I was going to witness the execution. The Grand Hotel ballroom was dripping with opulence. Crystal chandeliers hung from the ceiling like frozen fireworks, and the air smelled of expensive perfume and anticipation. Waiters navigated through the crowd of investors, tech journalists, and politicians, offering flutes of vintage champagne. I arrived wearing my best suit, one I hadn't worn in 6 months. I walked through the metal detectors, feeling strangely calm. I wasn't there to make a scene. I wasn't there to scream. I was simply the ghost at the feast. I scanned the room and spotted Tarek standing near the technical booth. He looked terrified, his eyes darting around the room. When he saw me, he gave a nearly imperceptible nod, then quickly looked down at his tablet. He knew what was coming. The Deadman Switch timer was silent, invisible to everyone in the room except me. Based on the UTC timestamp, the system would hit the T-0 mark in less than 1 hour. Preston was holding court near the stage, laughing loudly with a group of bankers. He looked invincible. He had no idea that beneath the floorboards of his digital empire, the fuse was already burning down to the final inch. I tried to stay in the shadows, but Preston had eyes like a hawk for anything that threatened his ego. He spotted me near the bar and excused himself from his admirers, marching over with a tight, predatory smile plastered on his face. He cornered me against a marble pillar, his voice dropping to a hiss, so only I could hear. "Who let you in?" he demanded, his eyes narrowing. "Harlan invited me," I replied, taking a slow sip of sparkling water. He wanted to meet the architect. Preston's face flushed a deep, ugly red. "Listen to me, you has been. If you say one word to Harlan, one word about the inventory glitches or your little safety valve conspiracy theories, I will sue you into oblivion. I will bury you so deep you'll never work in this industry again." He was close enough that I could smell the alcohol on his breath. He was terrified. The bravado was just a thin coat of paint over a crumbling wall. I smiled, a genuine, calm smile that seemed to unnerve him more than any threat could. "I don't need to say anything to Harlan, Preston," I said softly. "The math speaks for itself. You can't sue arithmetic." He stared at me, confused by my lack of fear, before sneering and turning away. "Just stay out of my way." The lights dimmed. A hush fell over the crowd as the dramatic intro music swelled, a cinematic orchestral score designed to inspire awe. "Ladies and gentlemen," the announcer's voice boomed. "Please welcome the CEO of Valkyr Logistics, Preston Holt." Preston bounded onto the stage, soaking in the applause. He looked every inch the visionary leader. He stood behind the sleek glass podium, the massive LED screen behind him glowing with the Valkyr logo. "Thank you," he shouted, throwing his arms wide. "Tonight is about the future. It's about leaving the past behind." He paused for effect, looking directly at the section of the audience where I sat. It was a petty dig, but nobody else noticed. For too long, this industry has been held back by inefficiency, by fear, by drag, he emphasized the word. But we have cut the fat. We have streamlined the soul of this company. Behind me, you will see the real-time heartbeat of our global network. The Aurora system. The screen shifted. The logo dissolved into a breathtaking, high-definition map of the world. Thousands of blue lines pulsed across oceans and continents, representing ships, trucks, and planes. It was beautiful. It was mesmerizing. It was also a lie. I checked my watch. 7:59 p.m. On the stage, Preston was ramping up to his crescendo. This system is unbreakable because it eliminates the one variable that always fails: human error. We have achieved 100% automated perfection. At that exact second, the clock ticked over to 8 p.m. Deep in the server room, miles away, the Aurora Protocol woke up. It checked the security kernel for the certified human encryption key. It searched for my digital signature. It found nothing. The logic gate swung shut. The system immediately triggered Protocol 804. Step 1. Self-diagnostic. The system pulled the raw data from the warehouse sensors, the real data, and compared it instantly against the admin override data that Preston had been feeding it for months. The processor crunched the numbers in a nanosecond. It saw the gap. It calculated a variance of $40 million between what Preston claimed we had and what actually existed. The system didn't view this as an error. It viewed it as an attack. On the massive screen, the beautiful blue lines froze. A stuttering, glitching noise echoed through the speakers. Preston turned around, confused. The blue map blinked once, twice, and then it turned the color of blood. The ballroom gasped as one. The screen wasn't just red. It was pulsating with a warning that was impossible to ignore. Critical failure. integrity compromised. But the system wasn't done. The twist I had programmed 5 years ago, the Deadman Switch, was never just about shutting down. It was about accountability. Protocol 804 was an automated whistleblower. On the screen, new text began to scroll rapidly, visible to all 2,000 guests and the millions watching the live stream. Generating report, board of directors. Sent. Generating report, external audit firm. Sent. The system was emailing the evidence of the discrepancies to every legal authority overseeing the company. It was attaching the logs of the manual overrides, tagging them with Preston's user ID, and contrasting them with the sensor data. It was dismantling his lie, packet by packet, and broadcasting the confession to the people who were legally required to call the FBI. Then, with a final mechanical clunk that sounded over the speakers, the dashboard locked. A giant padlock icon appeared on the screen. System locked. Evidence preserved. Preston stood frozen, his mouth agape. He looked like a man watching a tsunami hit the shore, too paralyzed to run. He turned to the audience, his hands shaking violently. Technical difficulties, he stammered into the mic, his voice cracking. Just a glitch. But everyone in the room could read. They knew what evidence preserved meant. We were back to the moment where the story began. The nightmare was no longer a prediction, it was a reality. The red light from the screen bathed Preston in a demonic glow. His phone began to buzz in his pocket, a relentless, angry vibration that I could almost hear from the front row. It was his lawyers. It was the board. It was the end. Preston looked at the screen, reading the words fraud detected. The realization hit him like a physical blow. The second ledger. The secret file he kept to track the fake numbers was implied by every flashing error code. His face went gray. His hand flew to his chest, clutching his silk tie as if it were a noose. He tried to take a step, but his legs gave out. He toppled forward, crashing off the podium and landing with a heavy thud on the carpet, right in front of me. The crowd screamed. Security rushed forward. But in that chaotic bubble, Preston reached out. His sweaty, trembling hand gripped my ankle. He pulled himself up just enough to look me in the eye. "Rowan," he wheezed, tears streaming down his face, mixing with the sweat. They found the second ledger. I looked down at him, feeling not triumph, but a cold, final pity. "The system didn't find the file, Preston," I whispered back. But it just told the FBI exactly where to look. The paramedics arrived in a swarm of neon vests, loading Preston onto a stretcher. He was conscious but catatonic, staring blankly at the ceiling as his empire crumbled around him. The gala dissolved into chaos. Waiters dropped trays. Investors were shouting into their phones, screaming sell to their brokers. The Valkyr stock price was already in freefall. Harlan Sterling, the CEO of the acquiring company, walked through the mayhem like an icebreaker ship. He stopped directly in front of me. He looked at the red screen, then at me. "Did you know this would happen?" Harlan asked, his voice low and dangerous. I met his gaze evenly. "I told him 6 months ago that the safety valve requires a human hand to turn it. He chose to cut the hand off." Harlan looked at the locked screen, then nodded slowly. "Protocol 804. I read about it in the archives. I thought it was a myth." "It's not a myth," I said, adjusting my cuffs. "It's a promise." Harlan sighed, watching the paramedics while Preston out the side door. "Well, the deal is dead, and I suspect Valkyr will be too by morning." "The system is fine, Harlan," I said quietly. "It just needs an honest operator." The next morning, the sun rose over a different world. Federal agents raided the Valkyr headquarters at 6 a.m. They didn't need a warrant to search for the evidence. The board of directors, having received the automated report, had invited them in to save their own skins. Preston, recovering in a private hospital room, tried to spin the narrative. He told the investigators that I had sabotaged the code, that I had planted a logic bomb to frame him. But the truth has a paper trail. I met with the FBI agents in my small garage office. I produced the 3 leather-bound notebooks I had saved. I showed them the original architecture. I showed them the emails Tarek had saved, documenting Preston's orders to override the safety warnings. The evidence was irrefutable. The code didn't lie. Following the trail of the automated report, the FBI seized Preston's personal laptop. There, they found the actual second ledger Excel file, exactly where the system's variance report suggested it would be. By noon, Preston was formally charged with securities fraud, wire fraud, and falsifying corporate records. The visionary CEO was facing 20 years in federal prison. 3 months later, the dust had settled. The merger eventually went through, but at a fraction of the original price. Sterling Holdings bought Valkyr for pennies on the dollar and immediately cleaned house. Every member of the efficiency team was fired. Harlan called me a week after the acquisition. He offered me my old job back, VP of Operations, double my old salary, a corner office. It was everything I had wanted 6 months ago. I appreciate the offer, Harlan, I said, standing in the doorway of my newly renovated office. But I'm afraid my rates have gone up. I wouldn't want to become a fiscal drag on your new company. There was a silence on the line, and then Harlan chuckled. Fair enough, Rowan. Fair enough. I declined. I didn't need Valkyr anymore. My small consultancy, Packetwright, had been rebranded. We were now Protocol Architecture, a boutique firm specializing in ethical systems design. I hired Tarek as my first senior analyst, giving him the mentorship he deserved. Companies were lining up to hire us, terrified of becoming the next Preston. I turned on the TV in the waiting room. The news showed a clip of Preston walking into the federal courthouse, shielding his face with a jacket. He looked smaller, older. I watched for a moment, then picked up my remote and turned the screen off. I took my brass fountain pen out of my pocket, opened a fresh leather notebook, and wrote the date at the top of the page. There was work to be done, and this time I held the key.